No, I got my hat on. Go Canada, man.
Okay, what was the item? Just the name
The
of it,
item
and then-
is community work grant applications flowing through rec commissions. That's the topic.
Okay, for sure. On there for 7.7.
Thank you.
Okay, so adoption of the amended agenda, yeah, moved and seconded. Any discussion on that? Everyone in favor? No one opposed? Great. Moving on to receipt of the minutes. Any errors, omissions, any discussion on the minutes? Not seeing any. Okay, reminder that most of you are online, so if you have questions, please put them in your name in chat. Okay, just so that we'll be able to see your hands. Great, we are moving on. We have no delegation, and we're over to 7.1. The unstaffed fitness facility policy development. Is that you?
That is me, and just through the chair, going to share my screen. And just Alana, in case you didn't notice, Director Page just came in the room.
Perfect, thank you. Yes, it's really hard to tell who all's in the room. So, thank you.
Would you like the chair just to walk through who's in the room?
That would be very helpful. Thanks. Yes.
Yeah, Director Lockwood's here. Director Popoff, Director Jackman, and Director Page.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.
Good morning. Thank you. Through the chair, so I thought it would be easier to walk through this report through a presentation today. So there is a recommendation in front of the committee today. And just so you can kind of keep it top of mind as we're walking through the report. And the recommendation is that the board directs staff to prepare a draft policy regarding unstaffed indoor fitness oriented recreation facilities and bring it back to the all rec committee for review. You'll see in the staff report that last little bit of bring it back to the all recreation committee for review is not in the report, but is the recommendation that I would suggest for today so that this committee can review it before it ultimately goes to the board. So just a little bit of background and history, and again, I'm never sure just how much everybody knows about all the different services that are within community services and how they operate. So just for some background knowledge, we have now 2 unstaffed fitness centers within the regional district. The first one is the New Denver, Silverton, and Area H facility that is actually in New Denver. The commission that oversees that is Rec 6, and it's known as Service S229. That service commenced, or the operation of that facility commenced back in July of 2016, at least as far as I could find. And we have a lease agreement with the Interior Health Authority for use of that space. It has operated as an unstaffed facility since its inception. We have partnerships with the Village of New Denver that support various administrative tasks to ensure that that operation serves the community well. We certainly could not offer that service effectively without that village's support, so we're thankful for that. Operations and maintenance is supported through the Castlegarden District Community Complex staff. So that's where their facility manager or operations staff do some, say, maintenance on the equipment if it's required, or might assist with purchasing of new equipment if it was needed. But that facility is supported through the Castlegar complex. The last count, there were upwards of 235 people with active memberships using that space. And the board resolution that got this all rolling, just for those of you that might like different pieces of information, dates back to July 2016, and it was a resolution 432/14 at the time. More recently, and this was as of July of last year, the RDCK took over the operations of the Crawford Bay Fitness Center, which was previously operated by the East Shore Facility Society. So the Crawford Bay Fitness Center is overseen by Rec Commission number 9 or Service S232. It too operates as an unstaffed facility, and that has been the case since we took over that operation. On last count, there was approximately 125 members actively using that space, and then I've just noted the resolution just for those that might like to see where that history comes from. So we have an opportunity to review and strengthen our administrative practices to support consistent and effective delivery of these services. I think when we got a second facility coming on board and trying to figure out how to operate that as a staff team, building in some continuity of how we operate those facilities so that there is some common practices where reasonable to do so, became important, and it just became more important as we've tried to transition, in particular Crawford Bay, just because it's the newest one, while also working with all of the success that's come out of New Denver's facility, that we wanted to bring some of that into this facility, even though there are some nuances between these operations. It is an uncommon operating model in local government. I know many of you will be aware that there is unstaffed facilities in the private sector, but this is not the common practice within a local government. But where this does start to make sense is where we're trying to support rural communities, where the tax base cannot actually support having a staffed facility in the way that you would see our larger complexes supported. So the way the policy development would be pulled together is that this is a last resort type approach to ensure that there's access to services in those more rural and remote areas. The approach that we have taken in New Denver and that we're working to bring into Crawford Bay is a really careful balance of community access, user safety, and financial sustainability within the operation. We know that if we had to staff the facilities full-time, like you see in our major complexes in those facilities, they would be cost prohibitive and unable to be supported through taxation. The development of a policy, we believe, would strengthen the administration of these facilities and provide a clear and consistent framework for moving these operations forward. So our primary goals of the solution that we're proposing, which is this development of a policy, is to formalize and support the RDCK's current service delivery model. We're not looking to change anything that the community has necessarily been experiencing, but we may have to tweak a few things in how we operate as we go through the development of the policy. But the goal is to try to say, this is what we've been doing and what do we need to do in order to maintain that level of service that the community has grown accustomed to appreciating. And then second is that using available resources to inform our best practices and risk considerations. So that includes reaching out to any other stakeholders that may be able to provide some guidance or support as we go through the development of this policy. One that we've actively been engaging with is our Municipal Insurance Association, or MIA, as many of you know them as. And they've been extremely helpful and very supportive, and we're continuing those conversations, assuming there's approval to proceed today. So the proposed solution is to bring back a draft policy to the next all-rec meeting, which of course is in October, and we would address the operation of unstaffed indoor recreation facilities under this type of framework. And there is more detail in the staff report, but these are probably the main topics that would fill in the policy in some way. The words might not be exactly the same, but I'm sure you'll get the idea. So obviously the purpose of what the intended purpose of this policy is and its specific nature to these particular facilities, identifying the facilities that we're actually referring to, identifying what our operational approach is. So this outlines how the space is being managed and a variety of considerations that we need to ensure are in place to manage risk and responsibility of users. Certainly a component related to risk management and safety. So this is everything from user expectations, acceptance of risk by users, how risks are being identified, monitored, and reviewed in order to ensure that we're managing the facilities effectively over time. clear roles and responsibilities, so what the users are responsible for, what the RDCK is responsible for, and in some cases, potentially what our third-party support people are. So the support could be whether it's the Village of New Denver or the in Crawford Bay, there's the School District 8 that we're directly connected with as well. And just if there's anything on their sides that we might need to consider. And then I've called it an exit strategy, but it's really where the policy would be reviewed to say, does this still work? If we had, you know, multiple reports of incidents or challenges of this over time, we want to ensure that there was a process within the policy to say, maybe this doesn't work and we need to reconsider these operations in a different way. So I've expanded some of the details that are in your staff report about the operational report or the operational approach that would be considered. And so I won't go through them in detail, but really for those that are very familiar with these operations, none of this should really be a surprise. This is directly how New Denver is operated, where things like you have to be a member to actually use that space. You have to sign things like waivers and codes of conduct, and that you understand the rules and responsibilities of being in those spaces. There are some things we want to clean up and make sure are consistent across the operation, which would be things like age requirements, like do we allow somebody that is quote unquote a minor to be in the space, and if so, under what conditions? And aligning some of those practices where we can with what you also see within our larger operations today. And then on the risk management and safety side, it's just acknowledging that there are inherent risks, not unlike being in any public space with use of these particular facilities. Clearly identifying user expectations and what should happen in the event of an emergency, making sure that we have practices in place in there for people to respond to an emergency if they should ever have one. Requiring a reporting of injuries or unsafe conditions. We do that right now. We see it in New Denver. There's people that naturally do that for us. And if Director Fike, or a shout out to Director Fike in New Denver, is a passionate user of that space and is often somebody that is reporting this information to us, but formalizing those processes so that it's not reliant on a person. It could be reliant on any user to report those conditions to us and how to do that. And then describing how we will identify risks, monitor them, and review them as a staff team or the responsible agency of the RDCK. And then what, if any, additional access controls we may need to consider adding if through our research we decide that there is better practices to improve risk mitigation in these spaces. I don't know if that will be the case or not, but that would form all part of this policy. So that is a very high level overview of the report. Maybe I'll just throw it open through the chair for questions.
Yeah, I will start by just saying, remember, we're gonna get a report back with what this is gonna look like. So let's make sure we don't get too granular before we get that report and just keep the questions based on the report that we have in front of us. Director Popoff.
Yes, so I'd like to move the recommendation for discussion purposes.
Great, second.
And I'd like to start speaking on it.
Go for
And first of all, I'd like to thank Tricia for the report that you produced. I read it, very detailed. And since we had that facility since 2016, we have a lot of issues that were not really addressed. And some were addressed, some were left hanging. And it's about time that we developed a policy. I'm in full support of looking forward to the policy, and I won't ask questions about the policy. We'll ask questions when the policy's presented to us. Thank you.
Thanks. Director Jackman.
Yeah, thanks. Similarly, we've chatted enough about Crawford Bay over the last year or more, Joe, probably a few years before that. The one question still hanging in my mind, this is, framed as unstaffed. Crawford Bay has had part-time staff. Does New Denver have any staff at any time? Okay, good. Because I could see the best scenario might be Crawford Bay goes the same, because there's a lot of confusion. If there's a window where someone can get a fob or return a fob, the school district doesn't want them going to the front, the school district secretary counter. If everything is in a policy, and then you have procedures at any rec center, any location, if someone picks up the phone, they know how to inform somebody how to get access, sign up. That's ideal, not having to rely on any individual being on that site at any particular time. And I think that's the cleanest way to go.
So just through the chair, just for everyone's benefit, the difference between New Denver and what goes on in Crawford Bay is the village staff in New Denver pick up a lot of the administrative responsibilities that grant residents of that area access, get their fob, pay their membership, do all those things that in Crawford Bay, for those that are not aware, on the Crawford Bay side, we have a staff person that we're paying about 7.5 hours a week. So split over 2 days. And so the community only has access to that individual during those hours. Versus in New Denver, they actually have access to the New Denver staff at whatever the village office hours are. And so that's where the staff person you see in Crawford Bay functions a little bit in what but not anywhere to the degree of service that the village is able to provide to New Denver residents. So it is quite a different scenario.
Yeah, Paula?
Yes, thanks. But if we had a different mechanism to obtaining a fob, that would be far preferable. You're not gonna find anybody in East Shore that's not in Nelson or in Creston every week or two. I'm in Creston nominally twice a week. I'm in this town nominally every 2 weeks. People who work can't make those few limited hours at Crawford Bay, and it's a source of frustration, and it's a cost to Rec 9. So if we could just tell people, yeah, when you're in town, there's huge access to some of the other facilities. Phone in advance, pick up that fob then. That would make a huge difference. Just some consideration, because otherwise your title is not quite right. It's not an unstaffed fitness center, it's an intermittently staffed fitness center. Okay, that's the only, everything else you covered really well, liability, it's great.
So I'm hearing that they're gonna come to your house to get their fob, is that what they're?
Enough people would come to us directors anyways.
I'm just kidding. Director Watson?
Yeah, thanks. Just curious if the policy, when it comes back and or report, can identify the various ways the policy will be enforced. I think with the multiple, like what Director Jackman was just saying, you have a lot of different ways it's short-term staffed or little staffed or not staffed. How is the policy going to be enforced will be my question.
If you'll have that in there. Great, I'm seeing yes, they'll have it in there. Director Page?
Yes, thinking of intermittently staffed spots, I would like to see at least the contemplation of what this looks like in the bigger centers for after hours. I know I've been receiving requests for the last 8 years from people who work shift. And in a broader context, it'd be nice if we eventually get to a universal pass that works at all facilities. But I think this moves us along that direction, at least in language, to think about how we would have a fob on the door at the NDCC and allow with some vetting, that kind of privilege, which might have some financial implications for the pass.
Yeah, go for it.
So through the chair, we can definitely do that. I can tell you even just in our conversations with MIA already. And I know research that I believe Craig Christie and I have all done actually in other municipalities around this, that the larger centers, it's the volume of people and the degree of risk just by nature of those centers that is completely different, that I know MIA would probably be warning us against that. They're even the language they're suggesting for us to think through, is my assumption. We can address it though, yeah, I don't.
Sounds like a fruitful exercise either way to contemplate and nail down what that recommendation from MIA would be.
Director Lockwood?
Thank you. This is exciting news to know that people can be responsible. Because Samo and Area G actually pay for extra hours to be able to have extra hours. And what I'm hearing is that it's working in other areas, that it might be able to work in Samo to add those hours that going forward.
Taking it. Director Davidoff?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I deal with school district stuff a lot, and in school district 20, and I don't know what it's like in other school districts, they're always like, our gyms are used a lot and rent it out and everything else, but we always have someone there, either custodial or whatever, to be there in case something happens. But maybe talking to the school district, how they work this as well might be worth staff's time. Thanks, Chair.
Director David. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions, and we have a motion on the floor, so I will call the question on that motion. All those in favor? Great, and any opposed?
Teresa's hand is up.
Great, Director
Teresa-
Weatherhead, sorry, are you okay? Okay, yeah, if it's not in chat, I don't always see it, so, great, thank you. Okay, we are moving on, that passes on to 7.2. Regional Parks, Trails, Water Access Strategy, who's taking that one? Great, over to you.
Thank you. Through the chair, this is a for information report, just to let you know where we're at with the parks, trails, and water access strategy. This draft strategy is now ready for review. So that's the purpose of the report, just to let you know that we're currently moving forward with pop-ups. They're happening right now in communities. We're up in Lardo and New Denver yesterday. CJ is at the farmers market in Nelson today. I believe tomorrow's Casgar, and then
Tonight.
Tonight. Oh yeah, she's everywhere. So,
Casagard this afternoon and Samo tonight.
so all of those details are available on the Engage RDCK platform. So the purpose of this report, I hope everyone can take, there's a link in the report. Click the link, land on that Engage RDCK platform, and you'll see what's going on with the strategy. So the last time this group saw the strategy was at a board workshop. I think it was end of April, early May. And so since that time, we've taken the report, we've incorporated some director feedback, and now you can find that draft strategy on the Engage platform. There's also all the work we've done to date. So all the engagement work, there's a what we heard report that's available there under the documents link. There's also a backgrounder report, which is more of an extensive sort of policy type view of parks. The draft strategy is there as well. It's 100 and something pages. So please send your constituents here. On the website is a quick survey. It's sort of a final, think of it as kind of that final chance to get the public to get it across to us if anything needs to change within the document. I won't go too far into it, but there is a little table in the report that talks about where we've come from. So I want to say back in 2016, we started talking about doing a parks inventory. We're now at the point where in 2024, we started the project up, and we're now in the final engagement stages. So the strategy itself, once we receive all the public feedback, we will update the what we heard report with the most recent feedback. The working group, the board members that are on the working group will make some decisions about incorporating the public and external stakeholder feedback. The draft will then be something that moves forward to the board for consideration. Yeah, I think that's it. And if there's any questions about that, I know we've hit this topic quite a lot in recent years, so welcome any questions about the strategy document or the final engagement that we're working on.
Great, thank you. Director Watson.
Yeah, thanks. I first just want to acknowledge that I know staff is working really hard on this and there was no ill intent, but it was super unfortunate that we were not informed of the pop-ups. I saw it on Facebook 15 minutes after the one in Lardo started. So my question is more so related to the outcome of that. Generally, I would have definitely had prioritized attending that because Lardo Park it's actually a constant item that I'm addressing with the community up there. So not being there was a miss for me. But my question is, in terms of the feedback, will we be able to get feedback that is park specific? Both Lardo and Glacier have constant issues, and the ability to address them, I was really hoping would occur through this strategy. Some of the overarching ones, not the daily ones. So I'm curious about the feedback and if we can get notes from those pop-ups from the community so I can review them. Thank you.
Yeah, through the chair, our apologies for that. I think it was a bit of an oversight, but I can tell you that the Lardo meeting was well attended. What's happening, and I just had a brief conversation with CJ about it, is we're getting a lot of that like site-specific feedback in the location. So I can provide you with a summary of what CJ heard from residents at the Lardo meeting. Aside from that, the Parks, Trails and Water Access Strategy is a really high level document. So it doesn't get into specific recommendations for parks. We have a different process for that. So the strategy does get into what those processes are, and those are park management plans, conceptual design, and engagement specific to the individual parks. So, but I do think there'll be some good value out of these meetings if we can forward the information we hear that's specific about the locations to the area.
Dr. Watson, did you follow up?
Yeah, please, thanks. So yeah, I also wanted to thank you for going to Lardo. I had asked for that because the previous engagement was pretty centralized. So great, thank you for doing that. Specific to Lardo and where this lands and the strategy, and forgive me because tracking where we do a lot of this work and what process is sometimes confusing. So the biggest one with Lardo is the constant conversation about expanding the license of occupation. So given that's a specific site issue, I think what you're saying is this is not the process to identify from the community if they want to do that. So if you can let me know what the process is to assess that when we're currently engaging in those communities. Do we repeat the engagement? How do we go about that?
Yeah, through the chair, the one thing we're fortunate with Lardo is we have a park management plan, and within the park management plan, there is actually consideration of expansion of the license of occupation. So it's in a policy document already. So I would suggest if it's desired by the community, that would be something to bring through the rec commission?
Yeah, through the chair, I'd suggest, maybe through Director Watson, it might be appropriate to bring it to the North Kootenay Lake Rec Commission.
And then from there, we could get staff direction to work on what we think a process should be to evaluate stepping into that possibility of expanding the license of occupation. So I think that's the first step, is get it to that group for a decision to direct staff to be able to work on bringing forward options for expanding the license of occupation if that's desired.
Thanks. We don't need a commission anymore, but I'll take it offline. Thanks.
Okay. Dr. Jackman.
Yeah, so there's on the engage page, there's the 5 dates you referred to. Is there another batch of dates coming out for other sites? And like to Director Watson's question, lead time, you know, when any other pop-ups might pop up. I know pop-ups are spontaneous, but the one or two spontaneous.
I see Sarah shaking her head no.
No, these were the only ones that we could schedule with the consultant. It would be staff time to then move forward with additional ones, but we don't have any scheduled at this time. It's the engagement kind of moves to the online process where we'll be sharing. They can review it and then provide feedback online.
Fair enough.
Okay, Director Walker.
Very quickly, so staff knows that there was still some inconsistencies, and I apologize I didn't get them in last week. It's just been too much, but I have written them down. I'm not going to waste everybody's time, and they're much clearer now instead of what they were. So I'll pass that on.
Great. Okay, not seeing anything else, so we are moving on to, thank you very much. 7.3, Community Services Parks Update.
Through the chair, I believe that is Craig, even though it looks like my name is on the agenda, but Craig is going to fight with his computer and get it, I can see.
Very long.
I can pull it up.
Perfect. Through the chair, I have the privilege of presenting this report to the All Rec Committee. This report was drafted by almost everybody in the Parks Department. Certainly, Christy Calder had a lot to do with it. Mark Crow and Carrie Gaynor also had a lot of input on this. But I'll go through this and certainly welcome them to fill in the gaps and hold me accountable in case I go astray in presenting this. But this report is intended to provide update.
I'm not sure, you have to share your entire screen.
I know it's a little delay.
Sorry,
Internet.
I thought that was free.
This is pressing internet. So two parks initiatives currently ongoing. One, the Parks Working Group, as per the report, we have deliberately organized formally the Parks Department. We have a formal structure for the Parks Working Group, which I'll speak to, and how that will be implemented and how that will impact the business going forward for parks. And then a brief discussion, illustrative example about how the Parks, Trails, and Water Access Strategy service levels could be implemented as it relates to categorizing the parks, dividing the service levels, and aligning with the recommendations from that report. Previous to 2022, the Parks Department was, and I apologize for the crude boxes on the slide, but the Parks Department was structured with the General Manager of Community Services overseeing the Regional Parks and Trails Manager and the Parks Planner. And the General Manager of Community Services also oversaw engagement lead, three recreation managers and several other people. So the intent of the reorg in 2022 is to correct the span of control for the senior leader in the department, and also look at having some additional layers within the organization that would help with the inter and intra-governmental business, and certainly the strategy that is discussed at commissions and committee levels, where the managers could then go about doing their daily work. So post 2022, the structure is as shown in the last half of the slide, with the General Manager of Community Services and then two regional managers. Myself and Christy Calder are currently overseeing those portfolios, and the Regional Parks and Trail Manager reports to my desk, and the Parks Planner reports to her desk, and that is deliberately structured in the organizational reorg. I would say that since 2022, because the focus was on regionalizing rec services, that we didn't get to a deliberate and effective shift in how we manage parks. So this Parks Working Group innovation is being brought to this All Rec Committee as a way of demonstrating that we are formally moving in that direction after these years. So the operational focus with myself and Carrie Gaynor and his team, and then the planning and development focus, and certainly the client services and programming focus for the parks with Christy and her team, including Mark. And we also invite into the Parks Working Group Parks Operations Supervisor, Communications Lead, and the Administrative Coordinator, as well as time-to-time programming. So the function of that Parks Working Group is to enhance the coordination, consistency, and efficiency in the planning and delivery of current and future parks services and projects, as well as related communications. So that's external and internal, and that's an important aspect of this Parks Working Group that may be a shift for how we've done business in the past, inter and intragovernmentally. The Parks Working Group has a formal terms of reference and formal meeting schedules, agendas, decision-making, and reporting. Again, this is a staff structured working group, and this is so that staff can get together and discuss those important parks initiatives and projects and services underway, and certainly connect the dots on all of the commission and committee and board initiatives that are also taking place. And the added benefit of this is that we're providing an efficient communicate and deliberate communications chain through senior management for elected officials and other intergovernmental partners and agencies. And so with that, the CAO and the GMCS or the designated regional manager should be seen as the point of contact for those individuals as it relates to the work that Parks is undertaking. The other update, as we've just heard, is that the Parks, Trails, and Water Access Strategy is moving ahead with engagement, and we are already considering how to implement key recommendations, especially related to park service levels, because one of the conversations that was at the workshop was how will this impact how we are provided the service, and certainly we hear about areas like Lardo and Crawford Creek and other areas that are provided service to, but how does that compare to other areas such as Cottonwood Lake, which is more central and is more, potentially could benefit greater from the central staff. So in the report, the consultant has made recommendations for how to categorize our service levels at level A, B, and C, high, moderate, and low, and there's a description in the report for how that could be done. And then staff would then establish a baseline for what we currently do, compare that to what was recommended, and then we would come back to the commissions and committees for how we could aspire and get to those recommended service levels. And this is an illustrative example, and I apologize for the size of the font. This is just to tie it to the report. That information is in the report. But this is our first cut from an operational perspective on assessing the current service levels that we have in each of our parks according to the categorization and the classification as per the PTWAS and the recommended service levels. So each one of those, if whether it's the commensurate recommended with current or it's not, each one of those will be brought back to various commissions and committees for discussion about whether or not the service needs to be enhanced, held, or decreased. If I'm missing anything, please step in. Thank you. And I think we will take questions at this time.
Great. Questions from the table or online? Yeah, Trustee Jackman.
Thanks. So, 20 of the sites are identified for an upgrade from C to B or B to A, and it'll take a lot of time and a lot of money. I wanted to talk a bit about money now and disparity, and just kind of strategy in the future. I'm gonna pick on Crawford Creek Regional Park because that is the highest rate per thousand. 3.5 times what BC and Crescent pays, 40% more than EFRG pays, 49% more than Slocan Valley pays. Reason being partly because the acquisition was expensive, but the initiative other than Columbia Basin Trust Grant to try and get every other possible source of funding to reduce the acquisition cost was maybe not the same as we would have seen centered around Nelson to try, let's get money for this, let's get money for that. The buy-in for some of these sites is extremely high. And the price tag is, in this case, only in Area A. There's a little bit of work at Piandel Regional Park, but holding that big piece of land, acquiring rather, was and will continue to be a huge burden. So something to think about historically, if you look at where the level of effort went to acquire parkland, it's been disproportionate. The level of funding and grants and all has been disproportionate. And the burden on the taxpayers is and will continue to be disproportionate. So it's a tough conversation to have because nobody wants to, pay more. But as we talk about upgrades, when we have new money, like the CBT, and I said this can be divisive, and that's because it was in my mind, and I said that a few months ago. Would it make more sense to spread all the money across everywhere, or would it make sense to look back a little bit and say, wow, to get from B to C or C to B or B to A, this site never had much of a helping hand when it came into existence. It has huge potential future benefits, and maybe it should have received half of the total of the money from CPT, or maybe it will receive 1/3 of the next big allocation of money. Not let's spread all the money everywhere and make everybody a little bit happy to address current disparities. Otherwise, it's not a regional system whatsoever because people move everywhere and use the sites everywhere. Now, you can make same arguments about the 3 big rec centers, but I've done all the math on that. And the little rec centers, like even a little bit of exercise facility at Crawford Bay School, is disproportionately expensive. Or the Riendell Rec Community Center, or Selmo, disproportionately expensive, and it goes on. But this is an opportunity for us to think about when we get an influx of money, look back and say who benefited the most in the past. And maybe the money shouldn't be spread so thin, it's not that significant. So I'd love to see another column or two here with money. So I mean, you haven't had a chance to cost out these improvements, incremental chunks. But then to think about not just money to get to the future state, but how we got as far as we got so far.
Great, thank you. Good, I'm seeing nodding from staff. We'll think about that. Director Lockwood.
Thank you, and thank you to the, Director, Jackman, because that's a lot of what I was gonna say. Because when I look at these lists, I look at something that is on this list that is in our parks thing, is it says Pulpit Rock Access, I'm just using this one, regional trail. It is not a regional trail. We keep saying it's a regional trail, so it's even in here. And we're looking at improving service to that access, to that parking lot, where the disparity to other areas is. So my question would be is, how was it determined to change the level of service? Because I use Cottonwood, I would be surprised to hear that Cottonwood doesn't get service at least once a week. As when I look at what happens in here, I don't know, but I would be surprised that Cottonwood doesn't get that service of washrooms or whatever, garbage. So I'm wondering, how was it decided to go from level C to B or B to A?
Through the chair, are you asking current or future? Is
Recommended, what's put in here?
Well, through the chair, I'll let Mark maybe fill in the blanks on that as far as the strategy goes for how we categorize that, but it's an interesting, what we, especially as it relates to Pulpit Rock, we recognize that we essentially operate the trailhead, not the trail. So there's and we had that discussion about how there's that misconception about what the RDCK's role is with that. But I think having said that, the scale of that increase, because it's such a small surface area, would be a smaller scalable increase as well to get to that level. So it wouldn't be a financially a significant increase if we were looking at that. But I think that maybe I'd refer to Mark on how we landed on the recommended service level in the strategy, if he's able to.
Actually, I can take that.
Thanks,
Greg.
for sure.
So the, in the chart, there's the current column.
Yeah.
And there's the recommended column. The recommended column comes directly out of the strategy based on the classification. Remember, there was like the sports field, there was like all those different categories of part. And so, and in that, it basically said, well, if it's in this category, this is the recommended level of service that it should receive. But that said, from the last all rec meeting, what we heard was, we're like, I wonder if the committee understands what is our, based on our staffing levels and resources, what's the actual service level that we believe we're providing today? So it's a bit of a, again, like to Craig's point in the presentation, it's the baseline, trying to say, where do we believe we're at from a service level compared to what the strategy is saying? And what does staff believe, you know, based on how there were details in that, it's in the report, I believe, where it identifies, well, a high level, a classification of A as a high level service park would mean there's the frequency of washroom visits, garbage cleanup, might depend on the amenities that are there. But it doesn't also mean that it's perfect, but we were also starting to get a bit concerned to say, we actually need to help people understand what our resources can actually provide today compared to what the service levels that the strategy is saying. And then to Craig's point, where does the conversation, and to Director Jackman, where does the service conversation sit to say, if we want more service in Crawford Creek or whichever other part, what does that then mean? And then staff could be given that direction to say, well, what would it take to increase service levels at these? Or people could turn around and say, actually, hold service levels where they are, they're fine. We don't want to move to the recommended. And that might, so then it just drops on the priority list and is not something that we consider. But there's, and to Director Jackman's point, in the report, it's kind of within a paragraph, so it might not have stood out as much, but there's multiple different columns that could be added to better evaluate service levels. It could be everything from usership to the type of activities or events that we see permits being requested for. It could be any number of things that need to build into our analysis. So this was just the first drop a pebble in the pond and see how can we use the strategy to inform decision-making down the line. So take it with a bit of a grain of salt. And that word illustrative, we've tried to highlight it a lot in the report to say, this is just an example of how we can start thinking about using it, and we also know the document is still in draft form. So if that maybe adds some color to your question.
Thank you.
Director Vandenberg.
No, thank you, and through the chair. So much of what Director Jackman has outlined as is what I had formed up in my mind. And I just want to point out that this work is ongoing. The PTWAS will inform this work. But just to touch on Director Jackman's point, that is moving from one service area to another requires, there should be some conversation around what that means in staffing resources and ultimately cost. So that would be nice to be able to see when the PTWAS and this report gets refined. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Papa.
Yeah, along the same lines, all those questions that were asked we basically answered. I don't even know if I would have asked all those questions, but to me, when I see an improvement from, let's say, low C to B, that there is a tax implication. So, and I think Director Jackman asked, so if we can put figures in there, what the increase would be in taxation for each one of those, they are separate services. So what the tax impact would be moving it, let's say, from C to A. It'll be an increase in taxation. Well, obviously, you're going to spend more time on it. So that's something that I would like to see.
Yeah, taken. Director Page.
Yeah, when we're talking about increasing service levels, the example of Pulpit Rock is a good one. One thing, I guess it's maybe a question first or a statement, how we're linking regional park or park auxiliaries or community groups, or the fact that there is a group of people in an area like Cottonwood who are making investments, time, effort, or Pulpit to do something, how that impacts whether or not we determine that we're going to take on some of these increased service levels. If someone's out there building trails and making sure things are safe and they're doing fundraising, for me, it makes a little bit more sense to take that from a C to a B or a B to an A to go get the garbage and deal with the washrooms and make sure that there's like some supervision on the site, because it's going to draw more people. But if there's a lot of traffic, but there's not necessarily anyone in the community that wants to make that asset live, maybe we're going to be a little bit more hesitant is my line of thinking. And do we capture that, or can we capture that kind of thinking in here?
Through the chair, I think so, and I think it's a really good point, because there's again, there's a lot of administrative systems that the regional district is looking to enhance or evolve over time. But to me, if there's a group that is actively involved and we can create relationships with those groups in a way that isn't something that we're taking on but are supporting, but is creating an enhancement that then moves it from here to here, is as a service level, because we think that's important, that absolutely should be captured, versus in other areas where that's just never going to be a possibility. And what does that then mean? And so I think it kind of, for me, it kind of fills in that usage component, and the usage could also be active groups involved in those particular things. And how does that then inform our analysis or tell us what work we need to do in order for those things to be effective? Like, there could be so many elements that come off of these conversations that help inform and prioritize where we spend our time to support service levels even as they are today. You know, so there's lots of the work through the past 2-ish years on the PTWAS, and now with the development of the Parks Working Group, this our internal group, we're hoping that all of those things can come together and synthesize in a way that we can present them more effectively to this group or the affected services over time. So this is very preliminary in what you're seeing, but your feedback is really important for us to. It validates much of our internal conversation, but definitely we look forward to seeing what we can bring back in the future to help inform park services.
Great, I'm not saying anything else. The only thing I would have added was kind of what Director Page says, how do you capture where you can maximize where we're spending our money by community groups that are partnering with us? Because I think that's a really important, you can spend the same amount of money and get double the benefit if you're using those partnerships. So how do we make sure we're capturing those? Okay, so not seeing any other questions, so we're gonna move on. Thank you, guys. Great work. Look forward to what comes next. 7.4, Community Services Project Overview. Tia, is that you?
Through the chair, yes, it is. Good morning, everybody. Trisha, I think is gonna, yes, fantastic. I have 3 projects that are highlighted in this report today. First is going to be the program costing analysis project. Second will be the allocation review project. And then Sarah is going to jump in on our new one that we have, which is an online ICE availability pilot project. So what I'd like to start with is the program costing analysis. As a refresher, for those who don't live and breathe recreation like we do every day, the reason that this project started was because we needed a method for assessing that full cost of delivering rec programs across the RDCK. We didn't have a reliable value of what the cost of support staff looked like in a pricing model. Many recreation facilities in our industry, they typically assign a percentage, but it's not necessarily reflective of what is actually being what we actually spend as far as support staff. And so we wanted to ensure that we captured everything from IT support that we see from head office, HR, as well as our regional managers, our programmers, our in-facility supervisors and managers. And if it hadn't been for some of the work that Joe had done early 2025, we wouldn't be here today. So this is fantastic. We did have a version 1 that started in 2022 once we regionalized our structure. So currently, this is considered what's version 3 as what we're working on. We wanted a model that was able to be standardized, sustainable. We wanted to capture both direct and indirect costs, and we wanted to make sure that we aligned with our fees and charges policy as far as our cost recovery. Next slide, please. Currently, where we're at is in a testing and refinement phase. So back in October, I presented to this committee with the good news that our new pricing model does fall in line with our current pricing structure. That was probably the best news I could have seen with all of the work that was being started with this project. Since then, we've realized, there are a few outlying program types that would have to likely be flagged and either incrementally increased because we're not charging enough currently, or that we would need to freeze pricing until the fees caught up to what we should be charging. So I will get into that a little bit more in detail when we talk a little bit about what this program costing rationale. So the other thing I had promised for today's meeting was a program costing rationale document. It has been developed. It is an attachment to this report. It basically gives a high level understanding of how fees are calculated, how program fees are calculated. We wanted to make sure that we had something that was simple enough for not only commissions, but staff and public to be able to see if they were curious as to sort of how we arrive at the fees that we charge. So let's get into it. Next slide. So this is our program costing rationale. I've spread it out over this slide, but it is more of a portrait style attachment. It is a 4-part model. So starting with our fixed costs, there are indirect costs associated with running a program. Our admin overhead, which I talked about earlier, we calculated it to be about 15% of the total that we see with community services. So that 15% is applied. Our equipment and supplies. So this would be separated by program area because we don't want the equipment and supplies that we use for camps to be paid for in Arena or something like that. So we made sure that we kept our program areas very similar as to where we use the equipment and supplies. We accounted for the training, onboarding, and mentorship that we do in order to maintain our staff, keep them certified, bring on new staff, help staff grow. Those are all costs that we have to assume, and we've been doing a good job over the past couple of years to identify those costs. So it was quite easy to be able to pull those in. So what that total cost, we divided this by the number of program hours that we offer in a year. Now, it would be silly for us to assume just 1 year of program hours, because we know the amount of program hours that we offer varies year to year. So we did take a 3-year average of how many program hours that we offered, and this became our fixed value per hour that is attached to every program hour that's offered in the facility. So fixed costs. That's the first part. Second cost is the variable costs. This is what you see, those costs that are specific to executing a program. How long is the program? How many classes does it run? What kind of staffing needs do you have for the program? Where is it being held? What facility are you using? What costs are associated with the facility? Those are the variable costs that get attached to every individual program. Third is how we apply the subsidization. So after the total cost of running the program is calculated, both the fixed and variable costs, we apply that subsidization. So that's based off of the fees and charges policy. That percentage of cost recovery is we recover 25% of our costs for youth and senior programs, and we recover 50% of our costs for adult programs. So if you've got a program that costs maybe $4,000 to run, you know, our aim is to pull in $2,000 for an adult program, as an example. The last part is the cost per hour approach. So we have very similar programs that run in each of our facilities with similar, very similar fixed and variable costs. So what we tried to do is we did an analysis of the individual programs and what that cost per hour to run it is. And we're seeing that we can easily group a lot of these programs together because their cost per hour of what we should be charging is usually around 20 to 40 cents within each other. So we're like, wow, you know, this would be a lot easier if we had, you know, for youth recreation programs, a fixed rate, understanding that if there are very unique circumstances to the program, that would be an outlier. But overall, generally, especially across facilities, we can keep consistent pricing among many types of programs. Youth rec being one of them, camps being another, which we very well do already. Adult fitness, swim lessons, those are just examples. There are a few more. Adult sports, I think, would be another one, rec sports. The fee that we charge per hour would be the same across these groups, these grouped program types. This also allows us to simplify our fee review when salaries or facility rates increase. So when we have to increase our fees, we can say, oh, great, increased by this much. These program types, this is the new rate. These program types, this is the new rate. So instead of looking at hundreds of programs, you're looking at, you know, 20. It's a lot easier for us to be able to make some of these changes. And then also our budgeting and planning becomes much simpler for staff. Next slide, please. So where do we go from here? So we've done some training materials and support resources for our programming staff. Today, I've introduced the transparent framework for communicating costs and pricing rationale. Next up, for September, we're looking at creating a staff-facing interface, more program staff-facing interface for calculating these advertised program fees. We have quite a challenging looking Excel document that's got a lot of different things on it as to how we calculate everything. But that's not going to be easy when it comes to calculating costs for everyone to look at, and you want to make sure that you minimize error as much as possible. So we're going to create something that parallels the costing worksheet. That's easy for staff to put in the variable costs. How long is the program? How many sessions will it run? That type of thing. They'll be able to put it in, it'll spit out an advertised fee based off of the groupings that we've decided. It'll be very nice and easy to work with. Where the small fee adjustments that we need to look at for 2027 will be done in October when we start to do our budgets. And this will follow that standard cost per hour formula that we just talked about. We need to also in October train staff to use the new costing interface, as well as any standardized financial evaluation or planning practices that we need to implement as well, so that the programming staff are approaching budget planning the same way. And we, in February, so once we hit into the new year, we want to develop that adjustment strategy and schedule for when program delivery costs change. So as things change, we want to make sure that we've got a sound practice for making sure that when things change, this happens, this happens, we move on, new prices, here we go, this is when they get implemented. So that is program costing analysis. I'm happy to take questions before I move on to the next project.
Thanks, Tia. Any questions on Director Popoff?
Yeah, so the question I've got here is basically, is this for the three main facilities, or like we've got Parks and Rec service in Area H, and I'm sure other areas have their services. Will this apply to the other, or is it just for the three main facilities?
Yeah, through the chair, this will apply to anywhere that we offer pre-registered programming.
So that would affect our budgets. Okay, thank you.
Through the chair, sorry, I just want to be very clear that the pricing that we currently use is very similar to the new pricing model. This new pricing model is much more defendable as far as how we cost. So you won't likely see much change or any change to budget in a lot of program types because of that. Or if there is any change, it will be very incremental.
Just a supplemental, like for example, Parks and Rec service for the Slocan Valley. If we run less programs and community services, fee will be less, or how can you predict how many programs we're gonna run when it's based on community input?
So through the chair, the community services fee, at least the language I'm hearing from you, is the fee that's allocated to the service. That doesn't change. That only changes based on all of the costs that make up that allocation. If there's changes to that, and which is largely due to staff wages and changes related to all of the people that are within this group. The program, so the community services fee is separate from what Tia is talking about, which is if somebody wants to register for camp that happens to be happening in the Slocan Valley, what she's saying is the costing analysis is showing the system that is used to create the fee so that the fee is defendable. And what she's also saying is that she doesn't anticipate there to be any major change in that cost, which is where your budget would start to come in. So if suddenly camp became, wow, our cost per hour is significantly more and you have to provide more budget in order to offer that service, Tia is saying she's not anticipating that to occur.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Thanks. Director Vandenberg.
Thank you, Tia. And interesting to look at your pricing, the new pricing model, but from the context of, excuse me, costing analysis. So my question would be, in your program costing analysis, do you then prioritize non-subsidized user groups? The thought that I would have is that they are higher revenues. Their higher revenue should offset the lower staffing and facility costs. So do they in your matrix do they in your matrix form a priority?
Through
Yeah.
the chair, these costs are specifically to how we charge for our pre-registered programs. So it doesn't necessarily matter who's registering for our programs. Whoever registers for the programs pays that fee. We don't take into account the types of people who register for our programs.
So there's no need to identify a higher priority to non-subsidized user groups then?
This wouldn't. Sorry, Tia, I think, I'm just gonna clarify, I think what Director Vandenberg, this is not for non-subsidized user groups, this is for programming that the RDCK is putting on. So this isn't when someone's, renting our spaces.
I'm sorry, I thought it was the facility overall. I apologize.
Okay, just thought I'd clarify. Do you have any other questions, Director Vandenberg? Guessing no. Director Handrack?
Hi, I'm probably off base with this too, and like, I understand that Tia's report is about costing, but at some point, are we gonna talk about the level of service that we provide? I have been, I don't wanna say inundated, because that would be an exaggeration, but I have been receiving calls and being stopped when I'm at the complex about classes being oversubscribed, people not being able to get into the classes they want. And I'm not just talking about pool, because everyone knows I'm a bit of a pool rat, but these are also the gym classes. And I have a hard time believing that it would be Castlegar specific. I think if it's going on, it's probably going on at all three of the major rec facilities, but I'm prepared to be corrected on that if I am in fact wrong. And I think in Castlegar, for sure, we seem to be having a problem keeping class teachers for whatever reason, which I think should probably go back to the Castlegar District Rec Commission for discussion. But I'm just wondering, we spend a lot of time talking about the cost, whether the cost is appropriate, whether it's cost effective, but we don't seem to talk about whether we're meeting the needs of the community with our programming. And when I have people telling me that they're up at 7 trying the day before class, trying to register before everyone else beats them out because there's only so many spaces, at some point, do we look at adding extra classes rather than turning people away? And if I'm out of that, you can certainly tell me that, but at some point, I think we need to have the discussion, because I don't think, fitness is so important for the health of our communities and the people in them, that if we're turning people away from classes, I see that as problematic.
Tia, where would that conversation over like service level with what classes and stuff, how are you evaluating that, and where would that be had?
Yeah, through the chair. I mean, we are consistently evaluating the programs that happen in the facilities, and you see that in our quarterly reports that happen in each of the facilities. Castlegar specifically, well, actually in all places, finding instructors is challenging, and the capacity of the instructional staff really limits our ability to deliver services. And that's one of the things that we're trying to get ahead on is identifying better ways for people to become instructors, easier pathways through the certifying bodies. So that is something that is top of mind for us.
Yeah, with respect to, I would say in Castlegar, we don't just have a recruitment problem, we have a retention problem. And I find that very worrisome too.
Thank you, Director Hanegraaff. Director Page.
Yeah, I just wanted to riff off of Director Hanegraaff's conversation, because I would be remiss as chair of Rec 5 not to convey some of the conversations that have been had there around service levels specifically. And there's been a lot of discussion around the contemplation of new facilities and how that would have impact to provide additional programming. And one of the things that have come up from directors regularly is that line between providing a basic level of service so that people have their mobility needs met, their physical literacy needs met, their ability to come together as teams, but also creating enough pressure within the community for the private market to fill. We have lots of yoga studios, we have the boxing gym. There's a lot of independent businesses that are in the community that are also meeting the need for those additional beyond services. I think sometimes we can get into a bit of as we hear from the communities, we hear from the public, we sometimes expect that we're going to provide all of those things. And that's definitely been conversations at Rec 5 about where is that line of service between basic access to physical facilities and training and classes, and where do we kind of put a stop on the demand so that the private market can pick it up and all the other, practitioners.
Great. So we're gonna move on. Is there any other, I agree, but I think it's a conversation beyond where we're at, which is with cost analysis. So, but totally take the point. I think staff probably takes the point too of evaluating and how do we evaluate these things. So any other questions on the costing analysis before we move on to number 2 from Tia? Yeah, I'm not seeing any. Over to you, Tia.
All right, through the chair. Next up is the allocation review project. So just as a background, we were in the process of making improvements to our current internal processes to improve the implementation of our RDCK recreation allocation policy. This includes changes to our allocation procedures, timelines that are better aligned with user group seasons, role clarity for our internal processes, more standardized communication tools, and improvements to our conflict matrix. Next slide, please. Thanks. So with the allocation procedures, this was a document that currently, or that we currently have in place, but we wanted to make sure that it was amplified. We wanted to update those allocation timelines. We want to, if we need to, provide new and clarified definitions, update our conflict resolution practices, clear expectations for both user groups and staff, and we wanted to include additional bookable spaces to our allocation procedure document, such as our dry arena floors, which currently don't have an allocation procedure attached to them, our Creston Education Center, and our Creston Courts in the community park. So I just pulled a snippet from the allocation procedure document that we're working on. Currently, we wanted to make much more clear as to how our pool allocation seasons are going to look. There are 2 intake seasons, a spring summer season and a fall winter season. This is pool as an example. There are other spaces like the arena and fields and such. But as an example, we would identify what the season entails, but there would be 2 different schedules that they would be providing allocation for. In some instances, it may look the same, May through August, and then a lot of other groups, usage looks different, May and June, than it does from July and August, because children are out of school and things look just a little bit different. So in fall winter, this one for the pool specifically, and I pulled this one because it's a little bit more, there's a lot more to it. It'll run from Tuesday after Labor Day to April 30th, and it will have 5 different schedules that they can provide differences for. Like I said, it may look the same all throughout, but in the event that it does look different, we're able to capture that. And that's going to be done through an allocation request form. So Labor Day to winter break will be a consistent schedule that they can provide. Winter break often looks very different for those 2 weeks that kids are out of school. Sometimes they don't have as much programming. Sometimes they do a little bit more. January up until spring break will also have an opportunity. Might look the same as Labor Day to winter break, but that gives them an opportunity to even just say looks the same. Spring break often looks different. And then we used April as an outlying month because many of our user groups have a transition period, as well as a time when RDCK programs start for spring. And so that makes April is a very challenging month in the pool to allocate space to. And so we wanted to capture that to make sure that groups were being served the best they could. Allocation timelines. This is an example of what they're going to be looking like for 2027. They'll be able to clearly see when their deadlines are to put in their allocation requests, when they can expect allocation meetings to happen by, when they can expect confirmation of a schedule to be produced, when the RDCK will provide contracts, and then when the user groups need to have contracts back in for signing. So these are all dates that will be in our timelines document. Next slide, please. Another part of this project is the revised scoring matrix. Currently, we have a scoring matrix that allows us to resolve conflicts between user groups, but we recognize that there are a few nuances to these groups that the scoring matrix does not help us make these unbiased decisions. So different weighting and scoring is what we're looking at. We're going to revisit the long-term athletic development guidelines and make sure that they apply to better inform the recommended number of hours a user group receives. Now, what is a recommended number of hours is different from what we can provide as space in a facility, and that has to be very clear when we get into this, because we've got many different user groups. Not only user groups, but we've got public space that we have to, especially in the pool, that we have to consider, as well as RDCK programs. And groups vying for space are not always going to get the recommended number of hours, because in the work that we've done with this, it is an inordinate amount of hours that somebody receives, but we are able to determine whether or not we're able to give 70%. And then the other group, where we can also give 70% of the allocated hours. And then we know that they're getting an equal amount of hours that is part of the recommendation. So we want it to be more balanced and defensible. Next slide, please. All right, and the last piece was the minimum public pool space commitments. And this is specifically for pool. Now, the issue, for those of you who don't remember a while back, is that public space was increasingly taken over by user group rentals. So user group rentals will often take many, if not all, the lap lanes in the pool, and therefore people coming in to use the facilities would not have an opportunity to utilize many of the spaces in the pool. Now, this was more so an issue for Nelson than any of the others, but we needed to address this in order for us to be able to in the future, if this became issues in some of the other spaces, that we can apply. So there would be limited availability for general public use, lack of accessible space for public time. So initially we had thought, wow, we should set fixed minimums for lane space. We should always have at least 2 lanes open. That should be what we do, and we were gonna come to the ALREC and make that recommendation. But honestly, after we sat and we thought about it and really thought, like, how is this going to look? We decided that it's not actually responsive to the demands that we see in the pool. So next slide. What we came up with was that we wanted to incorporate public space into our seasonal requests. So when the user groups put in their seasonal requests, we put in our seasonal requests. We do it for our programs already, but we never did it for our public usage or shared space usage. So this was not done before. We will start this for the May 2027 season. Just because as we start to roll out these new procedures and timelines, we want this to all roll out as one. So the data that we receive, the public feedback we receive, are going to be used to provide good rationale for the distribution of public use and rentals. There may be times where we don't see high usage in the facilities, so we may take up more lane space with our user group rentals so that we may be able to give them more space. There may be other times where we know there's high public use, and we may want to cut back on the times where user group rentals are available. So it's going to become just a gentle balance for that pool space. But we want to make sure that the public has fair access, as well as the user groups have access to be able to run their organizations. Next steps. So the solutions for the minimum pool access was completed. We have completed the allocation request form. It is just a drop form that is standardized and will be used across all of the allocating facilities. That is actually ready for distribution. So once we're ready to put that into place, we will do that. In September, we'll start to get user groups in on what their next steps look like. We are going to complete the updated allocation procedures. That's currently done. We will be able to finalize that in October, as well as the revised scoring matrix. Once we hit November, we are going to begin the implementation of the new timelines for 2027. So November is our go date. That's when people, I think by December 1st, is going to be our first intake of using the new processes and timelines will be for the user groups. And then after that, we're going to continue to engage user groups to support that smooth adoption of the updated processes, take that feedback to see how things are for them, make adjustments as needed, and do reviews along the way. So that is the allocation review project. Happy for questions before we move on.
Great. Any questions on the allocation? Not seeing any in the room. And I'm not seeing any online. So back over to you.
Fantastic. I'm going to push this over to Sarah because Sarah has been taking lead on this project. Go for it, Sarah.
Great. Over to Sarah.
Yeah, so this came up because we were looking at reviewing or updating our facility rentals page. And so we connected with our booking staff, which is our CSR3s. And during that conversation, the main thing that came up for them was I asked, what is the main questions you receive from the public to book spaces? And theirs was, what is available? Because we currently have no way for the public to see what is bookable time that is available for people. This came very high level for ICE bookings because it isn't like the pool, a public space that you can just go and jump in and access on a regular basis. There has to be a time like a public skate, or if you're a group that is renting the space. So it was really difficult for people to, ICE can be expensive, so they get a larger group of people together and it was hard for them to organize around that. So one of the things we've been working on is trying to figure out how to get that view online. And so we're starting just as a pilot project with Nelson, as they seem to get the highest amount of ICE booking requests throughout the 3 facilities. So we thought it was a good opportunity to see how this worked because we haven't used this process for any other spaces. And we didn't want to go gung-ho for every space and just get overloaded with all kinds of things that we had no idea might happen. So we're focusing on just Nelson and just for ICE bookings, as it's the most difficult thing for people to get access to. And so this widget will be in set of our Explorer Recreation software and it'll be added to our website. There is some restrictions on how we can do things. So people will only be able to see 15 days up in advance. So they won't be able to say, hey, in December, I want to book a time for me and my family to go. They'll have to wait until 15 days prior to be able to book that space. It will also be space that is left over from allocation processes. And what is available will be limited depending on the groups that will be already having that space booked through the allocation process, plus our RDCK programming. Additionally, they'll only be able to book up to 48 hours in advance, so if they wanna go on ice tomorrow, we unfortunately can't make that happen, because we still have to go through a whole process to make sure that they can get access to the space, and so we need at least 48 hours for that to happen. There'll be a minimum ice time of an hour, and then there'll be a 15-minute ice clean after that. So if there's an hour and a half spot, they can't, one group can't take 45 minutes and another group can't take 45 minutes. That would just be, there'd be probably 15 minutes of dead ice, because you'd have an hour and then 15 minutes. They're still gonna be required to submit a booking request. This view is really just to show them what they can request. We can't have them book directly online due to the intricacies of making sure that we fit the schedule to the best of our ability, so we're not wasting a lot of space. And that's gonna be gonna be the CSR3s and our booking staff who still manage that process. But it's just gonna be able to give the public a better opportunity to see what they are available to book, to reduce those questions and help the public understand what is available to them. So we'll be reviewing this. We'll start this in August, so it'll be for the summer ice season in Nelson, which they have said. We were like, oh, let's start in October, but staff in Nelson were like, no, we actually get a high amount of people that want to book summer ice, because it becomes the most available. There isn't a lot of user groups that are using it at that time, so there's a lot of private bookings that we see, so they wanted to see that come to fruition so that it's available to them. So we'll be testing that, and we'll be doing it for NDCC Ice for the remainder of the ice season. While that's going on, we'll be taking feedback if things are going on, trying to tweak it and going from there. And then after that ice season, we'll see what else we can open up potentially for Castlegar and Creston. And then as years go on, we could potentially open it up for room bookings to see what's available, potentially pool, as the pool gets, a little more complicated than that. But that is like our far-reaching goal in that. But right now we're just focusing on Nelson Ice, and then if it goes well, Creston and Castlegar Ice as well.
Questions from the table or online?
Good job.
I'm not seeing it. My only question is the 15 days, is that just like because you guys picked 15 days? Is there a reason that we picked 15 days? Just curious.
It became like 2 weeks in advance was more where we were thinking. There was no scientific calculation to it. It was more that when we were reviewing the system itself, it was open to like 3 months in advance, and it got really confusing. Just based on how the calendar kind of looks. So we were like, let's just limit it to at least 2 weeks in advance. We are open to that change if the feedback is that's not enough time. It's a very fluid project that we're working on. So if we get feedback, then we can open that up, but we don't want to go too far in advance as it gets quite confusing.
Great. Yeah, through the chair, just to answer that as well, the key part for setting that timeline was to allow the ice allocation procedure to happen before these open ice periods were open for people to view online. Okay. So there wasn't that confusion. Great. Director Page.
16 days minus the 48 hours is 2 weeks. I wasn't gonna say it, but you brought up the number.
I told you there was no scientific calculation.
2 weeks before your due date to hand it in. Seemed a little bit more symmetrical.
Great. On that note, any other questions for Pia or Sarah? Not seeing any. Okay, we're gonna take a 10-minute break.
Oh, good.
We'll be back at 10. Hang on, someone hear me out. 10:40. Everyone online will be back.
Gonna be done by 11:30.
Will be.
We don't have a vacation.
Yes. Yeah.
Set up the beer gardens,
of like.
Did she see that?
She saw it.
I know she does.
No,
All right.
it's still fire, it's still. As a request, you said you're for it, there's. Takes another turn.
Sure.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. We are going to move on to 7.5 asset management update from Greg. Over to you.
Through the chair, the report for information is part of the agenda packet. Community services have been, in the last number of years, reporting back to the All-Rec Committee on our efforts to regionalize our asset management practices as it relates to the recreation and park services, and certainly have been at the table with the RDCK organizationally related to their it's our asset management planning project, which has been ongoing for a number of years. This thing to switch for me. There we go. And for our 2017 asset management policy, a couple of definitions. Asset management is the application of sound technical, social, and economic principles that consider present and future needs of users and the service from the asset. And asset management is a broad strategic framework that requires the involvement of the entire organization. So that was how we had framed it in 2017. And without getting too much into detail, that's how we're framing it now. The approach is a little bit more deliberate. And I'll give an update to the All-Rec Committee on where the organization is, where community services are. So the asset management plan, the AMP, was reported at the end of Q4 in 2025, reported to the board in January 2026, outlining a 3-year plan for the implementation as per the recommendations from Roth Irons, the consultant that had developed the asset management plan. And part of that implementation that would lead to organizational asset management maturation, because we're a very AM immature organization as it relates to local government best practices, is the whole point of this. We would have completed the facility condition assessment investigations on those that hadn't been done already and report out. And we were also looking at developing procurement for an asset management software and implementation of that. So that was in the most recent go forward plan from the asset management plan. The outcome was, again, common organizational best practices. So it wasn't going to be by department or division. It was going to be directed through staff, through policy, that we all get in alignment. And through that asset management plan implementation, a steering committee of department managers, including community services managers, was struck and had held a couple of meetings in 2025. We call a stakeholder consultation. Whether or not it was a proper steering group, it was led by the asset management coordinator that was also hired in 2025 to lead that and implement the recommendations. One innovation that did come forward in 2025 was the development of and the creation of asset management service A122. So that you would have seen during your budget discussions. And certainly Yev, the CFO, had presented that and the budget for that and how the transfers from each service came into that and what the service level was out of that. Unfortunately, that key staff, the asset management coordinator, resigned actually almost after that report in January. So that's led to a major gap and delay in the implementation that was to be their primary function. So senior management, and I've sat at the table with the general managers, including Tricia and Yev and Uli and Dan Sagan, to talk about how we can approach next steps, given that the critical staff is no longer employed. And we're evaluating the plan submitted in January as whether there are opportunities to revisit that. And certainly the steering committee, the way it was formulated, has been put on hold so that senior management can determine next steps. And we're assessing the best path for recruiting that staff, whether we need that position or something slightly different if it didn't quite fit. Maybe we'll recruit, and ideally recruit something that does fit. And so we also need, the main need right now from everybody is, as we approach 2027, is to determine the organization's infrastructure funding deficit. So the difference between what we own and what it's going to cost to renew those assets so that we get the most out of them. We're not we're not based on the data sure where that's at. So that's the key function of where we're at right now. In community services, in alignment with all of the asset management plan implementation recommendations and even our own processes that were in place, we do recognize there's a need for more accurate and current data. The facility condition assessments that were done 5 years ago, the numbers were very cursory, and the investigations were also very cursory and desktop in nature. And so we have retained the services of ASI Engineering to do deeper investigations on the 3 multiplex complexes, and also the Creston Library and the Rotocrest Hall in Creston. And so that was brought to the board for award earlier this year. And so they are pressing ahead to get those investigations done. And the outcome there is to provide a better look at what we need to fund our assets. And ASI may also be able to complete additional analysis of the existing data and FCAs that Roth Iams had done previously and present that in a way that is similar to what we will present in REC in the fall. But it will take the numbers that Roth had done previously and present that with current numbers as far as forward-looking investment requirements, etc. And also in community service, we will continue to support the organizational AMP implementation, continue to align practices and optimize value for taxpayers, and facilitate the transparent collection and sharing of data and information, which we're doing at this meeting, and we do at the commission and committee levels on a regular basis. And we'll report back to the committees and commissions about recreation and parks asset management initiatives and capital planning for budgeting purposes. And the idea of the ASI plan is that we will have a 5, 10, and 20-year forecast for the rec commissions in particular, and the Crest Valley Services Committee and the All Rec Committee and the board to consider as far as what it will cost to ensure that those assets are sustainable going forward. I'll answer questions at this point.
Great. Director Watson?
Thanks, Craig. And sorry if I missed it in your report. Where are parks and asset management? This is addressing facilities, but I'm curious, we do have reserves on our parks, and are we looking at asset management for parks, and what's the process for that?
Through the chair, there are various facilities in the parks that have been assessed. There are a couple of FCAs that were done. We aren't quite there with all of them, but parks are they're not approached in the same way that we do with facilities, recreation facilities, but we do try to, and we will try to endeavor to employ and utilize similar practices. Certainly, if the board were to look at the policy the way it's written and apply it in a way that was forward-looking, and we would have to apply that to our park services as well. But currently, parks is a little more ad hoc than rec services are.
Supplemental?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I do believe the asset management from a natural capital perspective is a critical component to our considerations and funding. We know we're doing natural asset management planning in Quartz Creek area. We had some work done through sustainability in Area H. I believe it was actually Silverton and the watershed up there. So I'd like to know and recommend that we look at natural asset aspects of our management programs for assets. It's not just buildings, it's actually the parks lands themselves, which are part of our assets or leased assets. Thanks.
Hagan. Great. Director Jackman?
Yeah, thanks. Through the chair, did you have a conversation or any progress around the topic of a digital record of our buildings? I haven't seen a tender for a long time, years, maybe decades, for any major facility that wasn't a digital, like electronic drawing. I remember the guys used to hand draw building tender documents, but that hasn't happened probably since the 80s very much. Is the consultant going to be able to draw our buildings? And if they can't draw our buildings, is trying to quantify our assets? Can we maybe use some of this funding and get our own staff person to draw our buildings? Because there's no better way to quantify stuff than click the button, all windows, click the button, all floor areas, click the, whatever.
Through the chair, that conversation did come up with ASI during the initial interview prior to the award recommendation, and then since we've had one meeting, but that we haven't fully developed that concept with them. There is money because of the value of the award versus the budget. There is money to consider adding that to the scope, so we can thanks for bringing that back up. We can go back to them and consider how we could apply that model for recreation. But then if that's not feasible through ASI, given that there is some surplus, we could consider staff or another outside company.
If I can, using staff to draw our own facilities is optimal, because then when you need to pull out what we have, they know exactly the keystrokes to find what they need to know. And it'd just be continuously faster, easier to write own records, our own people who know how to manage them. I bet you there's very few people coming out of university that couldn't do you and any technical training, they couldn't do it on as well.
Thanks. Director Data.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Our community halls in particular are having huge problems. Volunteer societies, boards that are really hard to fill, but every grant that they apply for, like CBT or anybody, they're being told, well, what is your asset management plan? Well, you can't really start the asset management plan without an assessment first. I have 5 community halls. I would be prepared to provide a community works grant to support, including our community halls in Area I, Sentinel Mountain, as part of this assessment, because they are community assets. They are supported by our ratepayers in a very big way. And the key thing is that, and there's huge pressure on us for grants to do this. So I guess through the chair, is our CEO here in this meeting?
I don't see him anymore. He was, but I don't see him.
Okay, then a question for our CFO, Yev. So the
Yeah,
question.
are you on? Let's make sure he's there first before.
Is Yev on?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Okay, Yev. So I think you get where I'm going with this, is that, for example, Terry's Community Hall, I mean, they're working on, they go to CBT, CBT offers courses on how to do asset management planning, but it's like really hard for these volunteer groups. And we have, they're not RDCK assets, but they are very much our community assets. If I were to suggest a grant, could we cost out what an assessment of each of our community halls would cost, so that I could then submit an application through the RDCK for community planning purposes, some angle that UBCM would cover, and to do this assessment work in our communities? Is that within the realm of possibility? Because I think it would help. I think Walter's got 11 or 13 community halls, 11. So, and this is the same problem for everybody that has community halls in their community. So yeah, is that within the realm of possibility?
Yeah.
Through the chair, we would have to clarify, I think first, whether Community Works, that funding is eligible, as we're all aware. So the third-party funding has been becoming less and less eligible. So we can, I can speak with Mike and Uli and see what options are for doing condition assessments, and then we can bring that back.
Okay, supplemental chair?
Yep.
Yeah, to me, it's almost like when you do planning in a community, like there's stuff qualified because we're not focusing on the society. We're talking about planning within our community. I think that's the angle that I was thinking about for this. And we have managed to use money for UBCM was good with us using CFW money to do this. I think it would be a real big benefit to all of our communities, and where we have these community assets, and they really are. Terry's Community Hall, every member from the Brilliant Dam to the Sure Acres Bridge is part of that. 2,000 residents. How can that not be a community asset? That you get where I'm going. So I think the argument writes itself and stuff like that, but if staff could look into this, that would be awesome. And then we got a deadline to meet as well to include this. So thank you very much, Chair, for allowing me the time to raise this. And then I've got, the next item is also dealing with something like this.
2 items down, but yes, you'll get there. Great. So staff says that they'll look into it. Okay, over to you, Director Popoff.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I did energy retrofits for about 10 or 11 halls through Community Works funds, and they were eligible. And the argument that we use is they're not really assets of the regional districts, but they are assets to the community. And when you take a look at a rural area, what assets do we really have other than possibly some of the rec facilities, but we don't have that many rec facilities, fire halls. So I would definitely agree with Director David Up that we should take a good look at it if they are eligible for exactly what he said.
Great. It sounds like, yeah, you've got that. You said you guys are gonna look into it. Okay, thank you.
So Chair, just on process, I think I would like a report back to maybe the next board meeting, not to the next all rec meeting on this, if this is possible, because we have to action it very quickly if we're looking at setting this up for next year or to meet this project deadline. Is that
Yeah.
doable through the chair to Yev?
So I would probably leave that with the executive and staff to figure out the when. I don't want to put a timeline on that from a single director to them, but I do think that they take your point that it is time sensitive, and I know that our executive is here as well. So yeah, unless unless you want to make a formal motion, then we can.
I can make a formal motion that staff look into this and report back to the next board meeting.
What's the
Okay.
motion?
That's the motion.
What's the motion?
That staff look into using Community Works funds for community halls and asset
Assessment.
management.
Yeah.
Assessments.
And I would second that.
Okay.
And I can speak to that. A little stipulation here so that they can come back with a report so we can submit an application.
Yeah.
To meet the deadline before election.
Yes.
Over to staff. So that's the motion that's on the floor. I just want to give, I don't know if it's Yev or if it's community services, someone time to speak on any impossibilities of having that report done, or if that's a reasonable motion to have on the floor.
Through the chair, it's, I think it would be a fairly basic investigation and potentially a call to UBCM, so it shouldn't require a lot of effort.
Thank you.
Great, and process, just going over to Chair Watson, process is because I'm not as familiar with RDCK process. Director makes a motion to put a report for a timeline to the board. Is there anything that's out of line there?
Technically, you don't need a motion. It's a direction to staff that could even be offline. We already had a report on what Community Works was eligible for. This is a furthering inquiry, which is a phone call to UBCM. So you can make a motion. You don't need it. Yeb said he can do it. So
I'd like the motion on the record, please, so that this is formalized.
Great, okay, just making sure there's nothing out of line. Okay, on that motion, the report comes back to the board. Any other further discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Great. And opposed? Just making sure. Okay, that passes. Staff, you have that direction. Any other questions on the asset management piece report? Okay, not seeing any. Thank you very much. We're moving over to junior hockey agreements. So you two, Craig?
Yes, through the chair, last one for me, this morning. As previously reported and discussed, staff have been working through the chair, have been working to align all three junior hockey organizations, facility use agreements. So that's with Castlegar Rebels, the Nelson Leafs, and the Creston, now called the Creston Thunder. Staff had, as of 2025, staff had intended to have these aligned and brought to this committee for approval. We made some progress in 2025 related to advertising and branding. So through their league restructuring, they had made specific requests to allow them some opportunity to generate revenue. And so we had at the local level at each commission discussed that. And so we had made those concessions. All three agreements have expired or will expire. I believe it's the Crescent Thunder, their long-term 5-year agreement expires in August, but the Nelson Leafs and the Castlegar Rebels currently don't have a long-term agreement for use of our facilities. The one thing that did happen this year that was reported just happened just before the last all recreation committee meeting was that the KIJHL essentially disbanded. That's the actual outcome. Back then we didn't quite know what was going on, but 2 of the franchises have joined the Western International Junior Hockey League, and one, the Nelson Leafs, is now part of the British Columbia Amateur Hockey Conference. I think BCAHA got that wrong, so it's the British Columbia Hockey Conference. Apologies for the acronym. And so just for some background and rationale, the usage of the recreation facilities has been subsidized locally over time, meaning at each local commission or committee, there have been locally relevant terms and conditions built and agreed to suit each franchise and each operation, each service. Even though the use is the same and the benefits to the communities is the same, but scalable, larger market teams like the Nelson Leafs generate more revenue through ticket sales and certainly have more opportunity to sell tickets given the arena has more seats versus the Crescent Thunder or the Castlegar Rebels. But essentially the benefits are sports entertainment, and as community organizations and being involved, they are community drivers. We, trying to make that comparison to some of the other services that we provide benefit through sport, recreation, and health and wellness, where this is not necessarily locally doesn't provide benefits locally that way. It's more of a sport entertainment community driver benefit. But in the meantime, since those agreements were implemented and sort of traditional language was carried forward year after year, giving concessions and consideration for their use of our facilities, the fees and charges policy came into effect and was implemented, and the allocation policy also came into effect and has been implemented. And so those local arrangements are less balanced and less sustainable for the taxpayers and the facility users. So what we've tried to do is align those terms with these 3 teams so that the board can make those decisions in allowing concessions and considerations, and even whether or not subsidize groups in certain situations. So staff met with all 3 franchises back when they were part of the same league in 2025 to discuss the league's plans to expand to a 2-tiered system. And at that time it was believed that the Nelson Leafs would be designated Tier 1 and the Rebels and the Thunder would be designated Tier 2. And then of course the league disbanded. So that challenge is to try to keep that conversation moving, but staff met with franchises individually to discuss the new league model. The one thing that they did discuss is that even though the groups are breaking up, they're still going to approach hockey business in the same way and have plus or minus the same number of home games they would. So both leagues are looking at having up to 2 additional home games during the season. The season is similar in length. And I'll speak about the implications of the end of the season when I get to the chart, but it's slightly longer than previous years. We've talked about that. The needs of the franchises is similar to the previous model in that they do need subsidized use of our facilities, free use of dressing room and office space, that kind of thing, parking, et cetera, which we'll talk to. But the one thing that was a little bit surprising is that with the one league going to a smaller group of teams, there was actually a conversation with one of the teams that their travel costs go up 35% this year. And so their decision to impact their own business model really is something that you bring into the committee's attention, not because it's relating to our consideration, but just so that they know that there is an impact to these smaller market teams and the decisions they made have an impact on their business models. So staff are considering how to apply equal terms that could impact smaller market teams. So we don't want to make a decision for one. I would say the Nelson Leafs is the bigger team and the bigger organization and generates the most revenue. So we don't want to make a decision for them that could push the other 2 smaller market teams out of the business of hockey. So increasing the fees for services in short term could have a negative impact, and we can be very mindful of that, and you'll see that in the analysis. And we're allowing for more advertising opportunities. And as a best and current practice is that if they can go out and generate more revenue for themselves through the sale of advertising on our property, which we currently do allow to a certain extent, that's up to them. And then that takes the pressure off of us for having to subsidize their use. So I apologize, in the report, this table is more spread out and easier to read, but I'll speak to this, these terms. And so what we've done is we've sent each of the franchises a draft agreement that has very similar terms, almost identical, other than, space use, etc. So it's a 3-year term with the option to renew for 2 additional 1-year terms at board approval. So what staff would do was present them with, you have a 3-year agreement, and then every year of year 4 and 5, we'd come back to the board to say we recommend or don't recommend extending this, and that would allow us some time to, certainly ensure that their business model was sustainable and they would be in place for more than 1 or 2 years, but not give them that 5-year outlook right off the bat without proving that the new league model is going to be sustainable. The season length, August 1 to 1 week after the last spring rental, and the last spring rental could be the end of March or it could be the end of April. And the ice in Castlegar and Creston currently comes out at the end of March. And so we had discussed at the all-rec meeting last year that it is approximately $5,500 a week to operate an ice facility, not including staff. And so that would be a conversation with each commission about extending the budgets just in case a team made it deep into the playoffs and required that ice to be kept in place. So it's not something we could say is going to happen for sure. The other conversation about extending the season, and this is specific to the Nelson commission, is that at the ice allocation meeting, the users did come and say, what would it take for us to extend the ice season? And no promise or guarantee that anyone is going to pay full cost recovery for those additional weeks that we extend the season. So it changes our subsidization overall. So that season length for all 3 of these franchises could potentially be into mid and late April. And so it's something we have to consider, that when we enter into these agreements that we are saying to them, we will keep the ice in for you until the end of April, no guaranteed cost recovery. The fees and charges will be based on established fees and charges. And so as Tricia reported at the last all-rec committee meeting, the fees and charges schedule that went forward, there was a couple of as per contract, and this related to the Creston Thunder. Their fees are actually far less than the Nelson Leafs. We pay the most for ice, and I'll just use the numbers that I have off the top of my head. For the ice, the Nelson Leafs to practice, it's $152 an hour. For the Creston Thunder to practice, it's less than 100. And for the Castlegar Rebels, it's about 122. And so those are established based on the youth, non-prime, and prime rates. And so those have been carried forward in these agreements. So for the first 3 years of these agreements, given that those are the only 3 we guarantee, those rates plus CPI are going to be kept in. So Creston will be less. They'll be not more subsidized, because the cost to operate the Creston facility is less than the cost to operate the Nelson facility. But according to fees and charges, they will be kept. So they will not be the same. Just for your awareness. But the language will indicate that annual increases will apply, CPI, etc. But we could also, if the board changed the fees and charges policy and the approach, could then say, well, we actually want you to pay more because you're not a youth group. You're a mixed youth and adult group, and you do not provide the same benefits to the community that other youth groups do. Dressing room use, this is pretty standard. They have a dressing room and they have ancillary office space, and during the season we'll give them free non-exclusive use of that, and that's pretty traditional. Advertising opportunities, so we have expanded, so we compared all the advertising opportunities amongst the 3 groups, the previous agreements, and so we've actually aligned those where they can have advertising on boards, the arena wall, the arena ice, the arena glass, and even the stairs where the stair risers have ads on them, and so we're allowing for that. Of course, the RDCK is approving all advertising schemes, and then we would request 15% of all advertising revenue to be remitted back to the RDCK. So we'd have to take a look at their books, and this is a change for Creston, which is currently 10%, and in Castlegar they pay $100 a year for each ad. So we go and we count the ads and we say, here's your invoice. The 15% just allows us to keep that And then those groups can go and generate whatever revenue they need to be sustainable, and then we'll collect a portion of that, given that we're selling public space on their behalf, or they're selling it on our behalf. Parking. So in Nelson, this is more of an issue than it is in Castlegar and Creston. It will be mentioned in their agreements, but Castlegar and Creston have large parking lots, and so overnight parking for away games for teams and team officials isn't a problem. But in Nelson, it is a significant problem, and in fact, in the past, it has led to them being hit with large parking fines in the past. And so what we're looking at doing is putting it in writing that they can have in this, this will be negotiated, I'm sure, up to 8 overnight parking spots for away games. And the conversation about using the curling club, I believe that's between the Nelson Leafs and the city of Nelson, because those 8 or 9 parking spots are the city's jurisdiction. But that is something that will also be in writing for the Nelson Leafs and the Castlegar Rebels and Thundercat to consider. Ice allocation. So one of the things that they did were very clear on requesting, because of their league model and their to make it so that they can have and attract a good roster of players, is they want to have a very good selection camp. They don't want to be deprioritized or prioritized lower for ice. They want to have a specific weekend in the summer when they can have their selection camp a certain number of hours in a day versus picking 6 a.m. to 9. They want to have that, and that goes against our allocation policy as it relates to youth sport groups, not for profits using our ice. And they also want to have a consistent practice schedule embedded in the contract. And so, for example, in Castlegar, right now we've got them penciled in at 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. every morning, Monday to Friday, because that's the best spot that we could pick. For the Nelson Leafs right now, it's I believe it's 9 to 10:30, because that's what they asked for. Actually, the Nelson Leafs had asked for 2 prime time, and we said you can't have prime time, you can have non-prime. So they picked 9 to 10:30. That's where they're put. But that would offset the RDCK's opportunity to provide programming during the day, but it would also offset potential school use. But then it would move those other uses to the afternoons. Where in Creston we have 1 ice sheet and it's not so busy, so we could move it. But in Castlegar with a single ice sheet, it will have a disruption to the services, and that is actually right now in conflict with some of the RDCK's programs. So that is going to be presented in the agreement. If it's 9 to 11, it will be in writing that you will be given that allocation, which is over and above the allocation policy. So that's to be clear for the All Rec Committee, just so that you know that that is going against what we have as best practices for our
I just asked.
There's already a list, so.
Oh, yeah,
then-
okay, very
Yeah, no, it's okay, I'll pick a list.
Okay, and the one player benefits. So in Creston and Castlegar, there was consideration given for the players to use the fitness and aquatic facilities and get an annual or a season-long active pass. And that was for current rostered players. So if the player was no longer on the team, they'd be taken off of the list as far as, and that was in Castlegar was given with no consideration, so nothing back to the RDCK as far as fees. In Creston, it was given in exchange for free skate sharpening and volunteers for some of our events. And in Nelson, in 2021, it was actually not permitted. They were presented with the option to pay full face value for that, and the Nelson Leafs opted out of it. It was $3,000 to $4,000 that they chose not to pay into, and they went somewhere else. So for the first 3 years of the agreement, given that that would be a significant cost impact to the Rebels and the Thunder, staff are suggesting that stay in place for 3 years, and then after that they pay full face value for those services if that's what they choose to do. And then the liquor license in Creston and Nelson, we do need to have special language in the agreement that allows them to use our license to sell alcohol for the benefit of their organization. In Castlegar, the Rebels, we don't have a license at the complex in Castlegar, and so the Rebels do special event permits. So that language will be embedded in the agreements for Nelson and Creston. And then the conversation we just had at the Rec 5 and then in Castlegar at the Rec Commission meeting is also that these groups want to come in and make improvements to our facilities. And through discussions with administration, there's no easy way. Well, there's no real easy way to do it. And so we will put language in the agreements that say that facility improvements may be permitted with board approval and according to best practices. So very general language that says there is a process to follow and you will follow it. we will follow up. So next steps. Staff have sent these agreements to the franchises for review and comment. Some of these terms may be negotiated locally, for example, the ice times that we've described, and even the number of parking stalls that the Nelson Police may ask for. And we'll allow for slight variation where reasonable and practical. Staff will finalize the agreements and bring these back to the board at the July meeting, and we won't necessarily have the agreements in form as an example, as a template to say this is what we're going forward with. It'll be a very similar report to these are the terms for each group that we're approving, recommending, and then let the board make a decision. And the intent is to have these in place, hopefully executed by August 1st. And that's the end of the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Director Davidoff.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can you put the page before back up on the screen, please? Whoever was doing that.
Yeah, he's bringing it up.
Yeah. Yeah, the page, that page. Thank you, Chair. So we just had a change. Can I proceed now, Chair?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so we just had a change of coach. The Rebels coach went to Trail and left the Rebels. Did the coach move from a lower tier team to the upper tier team? Is that what happened?
Through the chair, the Trails Smoke Eaters are part of the Junior A league, I believe. So yes, that is true.
Okay. That was a big thing, big news story for some of us, because that's a big move. You mentioned that whenever you have a new league, we're going to have more cost. They're going to have more costs, like the travel costs you mentioned are huge. 30% increase in travel costs is not a small increase. Is this the time for us to actually take a look at these terms and maybe have a shorter term to start, like start off with a 1 or 2 year term with an option for additional terms, rather than starting off with a 3-year term for the clubs that are in the new league, not in the league that our coach just went to. Because it's like you raised this issue that whenever you have a new league, there's uncertainty, there's budget uncertainty and everything else. But should we revisit the 3-year term and the options and make the initial term shorter for the teams that are not in the higher league?
Through the chair, when the report comes to the board, we'll have the alternate recommendation, and we could recommend a shorter term typical to our approach to this. Yes.
So just Chair, I just have a supplemental.
Sure.
Yeah, what is staff's thinking about that? Because I'm just raising this, but what's staff's thinking about that?
Through the chair, they've all asked for a 5-year agreement, which is the most that we understand that we could approve for a facility use agreement for this. And so 3 years was a compromise. To Director Davidoff's point, we are unsure of the sustainability of these business changes that they're undertaking. But the one thing, the agreement is that if they cease to exist as an organization, or their business model changes significantly, where what's represented in paper in the agreement isn't what's being shown, then we can always opt out of those agreements, and we can terminate them through legal and through the language in the agreement. So the risk to the RDCK of going 3 years is not as significant as if we go for 1 year and then we come back to the board, let's renew for another year. It's really just a compromise between what they had asked for and what, to Director Davidoff's point, if we were to be very careful, we'd say 2 years, but
Okay, so Chair, I do have one more with your indulgence, or I could wait for other speakers to speak.
No, that's fine, just be quick.
Okay, so I sat on the Castle District Rec Commission for 15 years. And for the vast majority of that term, we've had huge issues with minor hockey payment and contracts. And now we're facing a situation with a movement of a group of these teams into a lower league. And staff is already raising potential budgetary concerns. So this is where I think we need to do our due diligence as well. I know there'll be a more fulsome conversation, but will we be having a conversation at Rec Commission again before the board meeting? Because when's our next Rec Commission meeting? Just looking, it's the 1st in July. Is this coming to us at July Rec on the 7th?
Through the chair, the report for the board probably be drafted just before that rec commission meeting, but we could add this to the agenda for the Council District Rec Commission meeting for discussion.
Yeah, I'd respectfully request that it be added to our July 7th Rec Commission meeting, and then we could look at that. But I'm just raising this. Again, we're doing our due diligence, and I get it. Everybody wants 5-year term, and 3-year term was a compromise, and I understand this. But when a coach leaves, like our coach left to go to Trail, that was a shocker for all of us.
Okay. So yeah, I think that's a good point, and maybe in there, making sure you're flagging any risk on our end. Because it sounds like there's very low risk on our end. If they don't work and their new business model doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Yeah, through the chair, I mean, the pressure on ice right now is felt everywhere, and I think that if for whatever reason one of these organizations in the middle of the season stopped, operating, then we would make good use of our facilities in the meantime. So the risk to us is minimal.
Great. Okay, Director Page.
And I took a few notes. You did mention there'd be a conflict with the allocation process, so our policy. So I was just hopeful that we could bring the allocation policy back with amendments at some later date. If wherever we have wording that has conflict and we've gone in a different direction, if we could capture that in some new portion of the allocation policies, just to keep it up to date.
Yeah, through the chair, I think that there's also fees and charges policy that this doesn't follow as well, and I think that subsidy that they get, these groups get, is also goes against that policy. So I think that the conversation was more just to, if we put it in writing, in a contract, then we know that that's over and above the allocation policy. I mean, I think Tia talked about how the procedure is being revised, and if we had to get into some specific language about the long-term athletic development not being part of that evaluation, and we open that policy up for review and revision, then yes, we can talk about that specifically. I think that the facility use agreement that we have would be binding, and so it would definitely say in that this goes against the RDCK's allocation policy.
Yeah, I guess my comment is that at some later date in our term, or whoever the next group's term, that we would bring back some of those cleanup amendments, because we're operationalizing that policy. We're seeing it in play. There's this competitive sports category, and so obviously if there's not language within the policy that captures what we all see as a natural benefit to operating these facilities, then I just hope that we would flag that for a subsequent update to those policies to capture it so that they are in alignment.
Yep.
If supplemental, Chair's pleasure. It stood
Tell
out
us
to
with
me.
pleasure, but you can keep on going.
Well, I'll keep rambling to my pleasure. The athletic group rate really stood out to me too. When we're doing these competitive sports investments and the benefit that brings to the community, it does make sense to me to try and contemplate some level of just having the team use the fitness facility to go with the arena. And I'm not saying we're giving them a steep discount, but some sort of competitive athletic group rate that could be contemplated within the fees and charges. I'm in support of something like that, rather than just paying full rate. I think it's just one way we can show our support, and it could be as small as 15% off when you do it as a group.
Great.
And then, yeah, I'm good everywhere else.
Great. Taking notes. Good. Okay. Anyone else questions on that? I am not seeing any. That's all from you?
Thank you. Sure.
Excellent. Okay. Last we have what we added, 7.7 over to Director Davidoff. Please make sure that we just keep it concise. I think we all understand the challenges with Community Works funds, but just what the actual request for being on this agenda is, okay?
Well, I can be
Over to you.
concise and just say I'm not gonna raise it. That would be really concise, or I could raise it and actually have a discussion because we're at 11:25. There's no big hurry to get out of here except for the soccer game, right?
For sure. No,
Thank
not
you,
rushing,
Chair.
just making sure that you're like what
Yeah,
the
I don't appreciate that the insinuation is that I'm not concise in when I speak, and that really troubles me, Chair. I think you understand why it's triggering for me. Actually, I don't feel like speaking right now. I have to close my video now, and you understand why completely.
Okay, so would you like us to take this agenda item off?
No, I will shut my
Okay.
video and I will speak to it.
Great, go for it.
Thank you. We have a disc golf group that is going to build a disc golf course in the Pass Creek Park. I have committed $15,000 to support that. I don't have huge community development grant funds, so the only source I have are Community Works funds. I just sent an email to Trish and to Patrick Cadet, who's leading that initiative, that I'm willing to provide more than $15,000 in Community Works funds to pay for the complete building of this disc golf course. Unfortunately, Community Works does not allow us to provide this money to third parties. I also, Chair McFadden knows this, just did a flow-through grant to the Doukhobor Discovery Center for the city of Castlegar, who owns that facility, to do some HVAC unit installations. I couldn't provide a grant to the society, but I did through this to the city. And Chris Barlow prepared that application in like half a day. Now Trish is checking out right now how Community Works grant flow through works through the RD, through the Rec Commission to pay for the building of this disc golf course. So the rules should be identical. The CAO is the one that investigated the city of Castlegar grant allocation that I made. So we should have clear guidelines, and the CFO could assist us with this, clear guidelines on awarding what is a Rec Commission priority, which is an RDCK priority, to build a disc golf course that people can use free of charge at Pass Creek Park. So I'm just wondering, through the chair to the CFO, would the flow through of CWF grant be the same for the disc golf project that would be on RDCK land and would be part of our infrastructure as the city of Castlegar Doukhobor Discovery Center grant that I gave? So I asked the CFO that question first.
Great. Tricia just wants to give quick context before we jump to the CFO.
Yeah, through the chair to Director Davidoff, I just wanted to add a bit more detail to our correspondence, just so that everybody kind of has a bit more color to this. And so the disc golf group has been in regular conversation with the Castlegar Commission on the desire to build a disc golf course at Pass Creek Regional Park. And then more recently, the organizer of that group emailed me saying that I needed to apply for Community Works funding in order to have a flow through of funds go from the regional district to the disc golf group in order for that funding to be considered. And so, and just to add to what Andy's saying, when I consulted with corporate services on my understanding of Community Works funding, I did two things. One was copy the report that was sent to the board, I believe, back in, it was like December 2025. There was some information from corporate services related to Community Works funding, but I also outlined a couple of details about the fact that the project has to be an identified priority of the regional district, which the commission had not directly assigned yet, which we had a process we were working on for July to support that, as well as ultimately that asset has to be then ultimately owned by the regional district, have a plan to replace it, which of course disc golf might not be super complicated with that. But ultimately that becomes our asset, and then through that, it was helping the group understand how that process would unfold. So it's not simply us applying to Community Works funding and then transferring that money to a third party, which I kind of believe is potentially how that might have worked in the past, or it was a lot easier. But we were definitely just cautioned on what the process was, which was all I was just trying to explain, Andy, just to bring people up to our conversation with that particular group.
And Chair.
So sorry, now I can go to you.
Yeah,
So you or do you want me to respond to Trish and then you could speak?
if you have
Yeah,
context
just a
for
quick
Yev.
comment on Trish. Really appreciate putting you into this into this complexity and additional workload, which is not, but it's just the weird way we have to do business nowadays. I think Patrick completely understands that if we're paying for this, it's ours. It's not theirs. The baskets are ours. Any infrastructure they put in is ours. There's nothing for them to take away. In essence, this is an RDCK disc golf project that is being assisted by this society. Now, so I'm sure you made it very clear to Patrick. I also am prepared to commit more than 15,000 to make this happen, because I've supported disc golf projects in Blewett and other places, and my community members like disc golf, so that's a big deal. So I'll now defer to Yev to see in terms of the process piece. Is this the same type of process that we use with the city to benefit the Kootenay-Doukhobor Historical Society at the Doukhobor Discovery Center, which is owned by the city?
Yeah, I will go to Yev. I am wondering, after we get Yev's answer though, this sounds like a sub-regional conversation, not in all rec, and we do have a July meeting. So we'll get a quick answer from Yev, and then I have one other speaker, but I'm gonna move this to the sub-region because I don't disagree with you, Director Davidoff. I think the sub-region, we've been working with disc golf, wanna get it done, so
Chair,
I think it's the wrong take.
point of order.
Yeah.
This applies to every rural director with Community Works grant funds, and the process is what we all could learn from and use in the new reality of dealing with CWF funds, and it absolutely should be discussed at all rec, because every rural director could benefit from this conversation if we understand the rules.
Absolutely. I think my point is that we might be able to figure out how that works in a sub-regional with how to make that a priority, that then we can bring that to the all rec of here, how it works. But yeah, we'll go over to you for.
Yeah, through the chair, I think Tricia answered a lot of that, and even Director Davidoff, that this is actually the property is an RDCK owned property, so the process I think would be different rather than flowing a grant through a different property that was owned through the city of Castlegar. But we can certainly continue the process and confirm how the funding would work in this situation. But my first thought, it would be different than the situation with the Doukhobor Discovery Center.
Thank you.
Director Watson.
Yeah, just to be clear, Community Works Fund is administered in the criteria set by the UBCM and the federal government. We don't have discretion on these changes. By all means, sub-regionally, do what you can to work those things out. We've already addressed a Community Works Fund through this agenda that won't actually be approved until the board's already asked for the report. So it is a sub-regional conversation. The rules apply to all of us the same, and we received all that information quite a while ago. Appreciate that staff is trying to figure out the best way to do this on the timeline that is desired. But I do not agree it's an all rec conversation. We already have the information. Community Works is very much heavily prescribed to RD assets, and staff is already working on how to make it fit that hole. So thanks to staff.
Here.
Yeah, so I think we're gonna figure out how to make that a priority. We know it's a priority for us at Cascade District, and hopefully we can learn some stuff. Okay. We are going to move on to public time, and I'm not seeing, oh, I do. Public time, it is time. If you have any questions you have for us, you're welcome to unmute now, and we will hopefully be able to answer them. Any questions? Not hearing any? Great. Moving on. Next meeting is October 28th at 9 a.m. And right? Thought you said nothing. I was like, when I say your views are
So long.
so it is so long for me. I call for adjournment. All those in favor? Great. Okay. Thanks everyone online. We'll see you later.
Go Canada.
Good luck to whoever's here on the 28th.
Well, it'll still be up because they won't be,
You don't get
not till November.
Gonna be able to